was Paul the Apostle? Let's turn to Bart Ehrman, widely regarded as an authority on the historical and textual analysis of early Christian texts, particularly the Gospel. During the time of Jesus, there was extreme diversity in the early Christian communities and extreme diversity in the Jewish communities. There was not one religion with one set of beliefs. There were thousands of religious groups, and each one was different. And the easiest way to explain this is if you compare like religious communities to coffee shops, like there wasn't a Starbucks or a Pete's Coffee. There was just only these little mom and pops, individually owned cafes. So each religious community had its own flavor, menu of spiritual practices and interpretations of Jesus's teachings. And beyond the Christians and the Jews, there were multiple messianic movements, mystery cults, oracles, secret societies, emperor worships, temples to Greco-Roman gods and goddesses, and a wide range of ancient polytheistic religions that they termed paganism. And people would go from one to the other. So you go to church one day, and then the next day you'd go worship Athena. And so it was very fluid, like people mixed and mingled religions all day, every day. And why? Because there was no global capitalism back then or corporate America controlling the manufacturing of religion. Like religion wasn't this prepackaged product coming out of an assembly line where every single Bible and church building and worship service was like a clone of millions of others. During Jesus's time, religion grew organically out of people's lives and cultures and family structures. So in this very rich spiritual and religious environment, there were a lot of magicians and healers and miracle workers. And Jesus was one of many self-proclaimed saviors at that time who could heal the sick and calm the storms and multiply loaves of bread and cast out demons and raise the dead. Now, some of them were snake oil salesmen using dark magic to create miracles. And some of them were authentic. They were true saints with pure souls who used God's energy to create miracles. So Jesus comes along in the middle of all of this, and he wants to separate the wheat from the chaff. And he wants to point out and prove who are the false prophets and who are the true followers of God. And he wants to show people how to discern between the two and to be careful. Don't just give your energy away to a life path that's fake. Make sure it's real. And then Jesus goes and he starts to prove that his way and his path is the real one. And so he does some miracles, and he always tells people to pay attention. Because he says, look, when I do a miracle, there's always no side effect. There's no bad consequences. It's just a plain miracle. Nothing happens, just the miracle. Okay, but when a false prophet does a miracle, there's always a backlash. Like the demon will leave, but then it will enter someone else. Or you get healed from cancer, and the next day you get run over by a chariot and die. And so Jesus always shows people, when I do a miracle, I give others the power to do their own miracles. I transfer my healing power to you, because I want to show you that all miracles come from God. They don't come from one person. But when a false prophet does a miracle, how come none of his followers or disciples can also do miracles? How come he's the only one? So true power is transferable and shared. When you hoard power, it's not true power. It's fake power, and it will eventually self-destruct. And Jesus has this mission to spread the truth. And in the process of spreading the truth, he ends up destroying a lot of the lies. And this is known as the Jesus movement. And it's gaining popularity. It's almost like a social trend. So if there was social media back then, it would have gone viral. And Jesus is kind of like this creative visionary or this CEO of this budding social trend. And Paul is like Jesus's COO, his chief operating officer. And Jesus produces revolutionary content through these miracles and these teachings. Meanwhile, Paul packages that content, he reproduces it, he publishes it, and he takes charge of its distribution. In total, Paul travels 10,000 miles during the course of his career to institutionalize and organize all of these communities that are following Jesus's way of life. Jesus is a lover, a co-creator who breaks the law in the name of love. Paul is a fighter, authoritarian who lays down these new laws in the name of truth. Jesus is an artist, a saint. Paul is a builder, a promoter, a businessman. And with Jesus's spirit and Paul's boots on the ground, they build this religion. So now I want to speak to you about how Paul does all of this. Like, how does he find the motivation? God pours his fire into Paul. And Paul becomes this dynamo, this powerhouse that tramples through a territory with people crowding into the homes. They're piled up on the rooftops. They're hanging out of the windows just to hear him talk. And then Paul raises the dead. He heals paralyzed people. A viper, a snake bites him. Nothing happens to him. The police throw him into prison. His dungeon shakes, his chains fall. I mean, you could do nothing to this man. This man will outlive and outlast you. And a couple of years before this, Paul wasn't doing any of this. So how did he receive so much power from the Holy Spirit so quickly? And in order to answer this question, I want to share with you how God convinced Paul that he's the guy for this job, how God convinced Paul that some people in the universe are actually favored. They're one of God's favorites. And 3, how do you become one of God's favorites, which is the process we're going to talk about today called soul quenching.